The day Elise signed her divorce papers, she discovered two things at once: that the courthouse coffee tasted like burnt disappointment, and that her heart had been quietly planning a rebellion she hadn't authorized. She didn't know what was more alarming, the sudden freedom, or the unmistakable ache she felt when her colleague Mara texted her a simple message. "You okay?" It was ridiculous, she told herself. Dramatic. Maybe even pathetic. But in that moment, sitting on a cold bench outside the courthouse while the wind slapped her hair around like it had something to say, her first instinct had been to call Mara. And that terrified her far more than the divorce itself. Elise had always been the kind of woman who held herself together with invisible stitching. She had been successful, reliable, emotionally disciplined. When she'd married Daniel at 27, she genuinely believed in their shared blueprint. The house in Portland, the two kids they planned but never had, the climbing of corporate ladders side by side. All of it looked so tidy on paper, like a brochure for responsible adulthood. But life had a habit of chewing up tidy plans. The years had worn them down quietly, methodically. A love once tender had become a polite partnership that felt more like two people taking turns paying the bills. When they finally admitted defeat, there were no screaming matches, no epic betrayals. Just exhaustion. Silence. The kind of silence that made Elise feel like she'd been living underwater. What she did not expect was the strange lightness that crept in afterward, or the guilt that followed it. And definitely not Mara. Mara with her bright laugh, her awful desk snacks, her effortless way of making people feel seen. Mara who knew Elise's coffee order by heart. Mara whose shoulder Elise had accidentally brushed last month in the break room, and felt a spark she dismissed as static electricity. Elise had spent the last year trying to pretend she didn't feel anything unusual around her. After all, she had never looked at a woman that way before. She had never let herself. But now the scaffolding of her life had collapsed, leaving her exposed in uncomfortable ways. And in that exposed place, the truth had more room to breathe. She wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. But it was there. Waiting. Mara was waiting too, although Elise wasn't sure Mara herself even realized it. When Elise drove home from the courthouse, her phone buzzed again. "Seriously, Elise. Talk to me. Where are you?" Mara always texted like this, short but intentional. Like she was cutting through the noise of the world to reach her directly. Elise typed, then deleted, typed again, then finally sent. "Just left the courthouse. Headed home." A few seconds passed. "Do you want company?" The question was simple. Too simple. Elise stared at the screen, heart thumping louder than an honest heart should. She wiped away a stray tear, the kind that came not from sadness, but from a strange sense of release. She eventually typed, "Not today. I just want to lie down. Rain check." Mara's reply came instantly. "Of course. Call me if you change your mind. Or even if you don't." Elise knew what that meant. Mara wasn't offering company. She was offering presence. And Elise wasn't ready to accept it. Not yet. That night, her small apartment felt foreign, like a temporary shelter rather than a home. Boxes were still stacked by the window, remnants of her old life that she hadn't bothered to unpack. She lay on the couch with the curtains half drawn, letting the cold blue light of passing cars wash over her ceiling. She replayed Mara's question in her head. "Do you want company?" The truth was yes. A resounding yes. A yes that formed deep inside her ribcage, warm and aching. But wanting Mara felt like stepping off a cliff while hoping the air might decide to catch her. The thought alone made her dizzy. Elise had barely fallen asleep when her phone lit up with another message. "I left soup outside your door. If you're awake, open it soon so it doesn't get cold." Elise sat up, startled. She padded to the door and opened it quietly so she wouldn't embarrass herself by letting Mara know she'd rushed. There it was. A container of homemade chicken and vegetable soup, a folded note on top. "Get some rest. M." Elise leaned against the door frame and exhaled slowly. This wasn't normal coworker behavior. But Mara had never been normal. She was softness in a world that demanded hardness, warmth in a building full of fluorescent lights and deadlines. Maybe Elise had always been orbiting her, too afraid to acknowledge the gravity. She brought the soup inside and ate it at her counter, letting the warmth dissolve the coldness of the day. Each spoonful felt like permission to unravel a little more. And unravel she did. The next morning, Elise arrived at the office earlier than usual, a strange impulse, considering she normally tried to avoid mornings at all costs. The building smelled like burnt toast and printer ink. She headed straight to her desk, trying not to look toward Mara's section. It didn't work. Mara was already there, leaning against her chair while reading something on her phone. When she noticed Elise, she straightened up quickly. Her face softened. "You made it," Mara said. "Was I not supposed to?" Elise joked weakly. Mara stepped closer. "You didn't answer last night. I didn't know if you were okay." Elise cleared her throat. Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you for the soup." "You're welcome." Mara's eyes searched her face. "I would have stayed if you wanted me to." There it was again, that openness, that unfiltered sincerity that made Elise feel both comforted and terrified. "I know," Elise said quietly, "but I needed to be alone." Mara nodded. "I get that. Just don't shut me out, okay?" Elise looked down at her hands. "I'm not trying to." "No," Mara said softly. "But you do it anyway." Their eyes met again, and a silent current passed between them, something unspoken but undeniable. Elise quickly stepped back, breaking the moment. "I should get started," she murmured. Mara didn't stop her, but her gaze lingered with concern, with something deeper Elise wasn't ready to name. Hours later, Elise found herself in a small conference room with Mara, going over quarterly reports, which should have been mind-numbingly boring. But boring was impossible when Mara sat across from her, tapping her pen, biting her lip in concentration, occasionally glancing up as though remembering she wasn't alone. At one point Mara sighed dramatically. "If I have to look at another bar graph today, I'm going to throw myself into traffic." Elise laughed genuinely, fully for the first time in weeks. "You're so dramatic." "Dramatic?" "Elise, I am a victim of corporate cruelty. Do you see these spreadsheets? I'm basically being waterboarded with numbers." Elise shook her head, still smiling. "Maybe you shouldn't stay up past midnight watching cooking competitions." Mara pointed at her sternly. "It was one night, and it was a baking finale. Very different." Their banter eased something inside Elise, loosening the knots that had tightened in her chest for so long. She felt weightless. She felt seen. She felt something she wasn't supposed to be feeling. Not yet. But she couldn't look away from Mara's smile. Not this time. Not anymore. That evening, as they packed their things, Mara hesitated by the door. "Elise," she said, almost in a whisper, "can I ask you something?" Elise swallowed. "Sure. What happened yesterday? Was it hard?" "Signing the papers?" Elise asked. Mara nodded. Elise thought for a moment before answering. "It wasn't hard. Not the way I thought it'd be. It was more like letting go of something I'd already lost a long time ago." Mara's eyes softened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It's okay." "No," Mara said. "I mean, I'm sorry you went through it alone." Elise's breath hitched. "I wasn't alone," she said quietly. Mara froze, eyes widening with a mix of surprise and emotion. Elise felt her pulse race in her throat, and for a moment, she considered reaching for her, closing that impossible distance. But fear won. It always had. "I should get going," Elise whispered. Mara nodded, but disappointment flickered across her face. "Good night, Elise." Elise stepped out into the crisp evening air, her heart pounding hard enough to drown out the world. She didn't know what scared her more. The possibility that she'd imagined everything, or the possibility that she hadn't. Elise walked along the dimly lit streets of Portland, the city lights reflecting off puddles from a light afternoon rain. Every step felt deliberate, but her mind raced. She tried to reason with herself. Mara was just a colleague, a friend, nothing more. But the way Mara looked at her, with that soft intensity that seemed to understand all the parts of her Elise had tried to hide, was impossible to ignore. By the time she reached her apartment, the night felt heavier than the day. She kicked off her shoes, stripped off her coat, and sank onto the couch. Her phone buzzed. She hesitated, then picked it up. "Mara, sleep yet?" Elise stared at the message for a long moment. A simple question, but it carried all the warmth, concern, and attention Mara had ever given her. She didn't reply immediately, choosing instead to let the silence sit. But the truth was gnawing at her. She needed Mara, even if she wasn't ready to admit it out loud. Finally she typed, "Not yet. You?" "Mara, same. Can't sleep. Elise's fingers hovered. Can't sleep with you thinking of me? No, that was ridiculous. She deleted it. Instead she wrote, coffee tomorrow? Mara, definitely. The simplicity of that exchange was deceptive. It was loaded with possibility, with tension, with a quiet acknowledgement that neither of them was entirely alone in their sleeplessness. The next morning Elise felt lighter, almost alarmingly so. She brewed her coffee slowly, savoring the rich aroma, trying to find clarity. Her phone buzzed again. Mara had already arrived at the office, sending a picture of the empty coffee pot with a mischievous grin emoji. Elise laughed aloud, surprising herself. Mara had a way of infusing life into the mundane. The thought of seeing her in person, of hearing her voice, made her chest tighten with something more than anticipation. It was longing. At work, Mara greeted her with a warm, teasing smile. Coffee for you. I made it extra strong, figured you'd need it after yesterday's emotional marathon. Elise accepted the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. Electricity sparked in that fleeting contact, sending Elise's heart into overdrive. She tried to focus on work, but every glance Mara cast her way was loaded with an unspoken intensity. By lunchtime, they were sharing a table at a nearby cafe. The sunlight streamed through the large windows, highlighting Mara's blonde hair, making it shimmer like gold. Elise found herself staring, mesmerized. The cafe's chatter faded into the background, leaving just the two of them in a small private world. You seem lighter today, Mara observed, stirring her tea slowly. I guess, Elise replied, her voice softer than she intended. It's like a weight lifted. Or maybe it's just realization. Mara tilted her head, curiosity and concern dancing in her eyes. Realization. Elise swallowed. She wanted to speak, to tell Mara everything about the ache she felt, the loneliness, the terrifying pull she couldn't name. But words faltered. Instead, she smiled faintly, letting her eyes do what her mouth wouldn't. Mara's gaze lingered, warm and understanding, as if she could see into the fragile, unguarded parts of Elise. They walked back to the office slowly, the conversation drifting to mundane topics, yet every word felt charged, every laugh heavier than it should have been. Elise caught herself thinking about Mara constantly, her expressions, her voice, the way she made the office feel less like a cage and more like somewhere safe, somewhere she might even belong. Days turned into weeks. Elise and Mara's friendship deepened in subtle, unspoken ways. Mara would leave small notes on Elise's desk, or bring her coffee exactly how she liked it, and Elise found herself anticipating these gestures with a kind of breathless eagerness. At night she would replay every interaction, every brush of skin, every shared laugh, and her longing grew sharper. One evening the office was nearly empty, and Elise lingered to finish a project. Mara walked in, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the hallway lights. Still here? Mara asked softly, leaning against the doorway. I needed to finish, Elise said, heart thudding. Mara stepped closer, closer than anyone should, and Elise felt her breath hitch. There was a tension between them, unacknowledged yet undeniable. You always push yourself so hard, Mara said. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were intense, almost pleading. Do you ever let yourself just breathe? Elise didn't answer. She didn't need to. Mara reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Elise's face. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a weight that made Elise's knees feel unsteady. Mara, Elise whispered, her voice trembling. I know, Mara said softly. I know it's complicated, but you don't have to pretend with me. Time seemed to pause. Elise's heart raced, and for a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them. And then, as if pulled by gravity, she leaned in, slowly, tentatively. Mara met her halfway, and their lips brushed in a delicate, almost shy kiss. It was brief, fleeting, but it changed everything. After that moment, everything shifted. The office was no longer just an office. The small gestures, the laughter, the quiet conversations each carried a new intensity. They were careful, cautious, aware of the risks, but neither could deny the pull between them. One evening, Mara invited Elise to her apartment under the pretense of cooking dinner together. Elise arrived to find candles flickering, the scent of garlic and basil filling the air. Mara's apartment was cozy, warm, a stark contrast to Elise's sterile space. They cooked side by side, fingers brushing, shoulders touching, each accidental contact sending sparks through Elise's chest. "Do you always cook this well?" Elise asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Only when I'm trying to impress someone," Mara replied, a teasing glint in her eye. Elise laughed, a sound full of release and joy. And then, as if by unspoken agreement, Mara reached for her hand. Elise's heart lurched, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she interlaced her fingers with Mara's, savoring the warmth, the connection, the undeniable intimacy of that simple touch. Later, they sat on Mara's couch, eating the meal they had prepared together. The room was quiet, save for the soft music playing in the background. Mara looked at Elise, her expression soft and vulnerable. "Do you ever think about us?" Mara asked quietly. Elise's heart skipped. "Every day," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Mara reached for her, gently cupping her face. "Then let's not waste any more time pretending." And they didn't. The weeks that followed were filled with small, perfect moments. Quiet breakfasts together, late-night walks through rain-soaked streets, shared coffee breaks, and lingering touches that spoke louder than words ever could. Each day, Elise felt herself healing not just from her divorce, but from the years she had spent trying to fit into a life that didn't fit her. Mara became her safe harbor, her joy, her unexpected home. But as beautiful as their connection was, it wasn't without challenges. They had to navigate the complexities of workplace boundaries, the fear of judgment, and the lingering shadows of past relationships. Yet, through it all, they found a rhythm, a dance of understanding and trust that only grew stronger with each passing day. One rainy afternoon, as they walked side by side through a quiet park, Mara stopped and pulled Elise close. "I never expected this," Mara admitted, her voice soft and vulnerable. "I never imagined finding someone like you." Elise looked up, her eyes glistening. "Neither did I. But I'm grateful I did." They kissed then, long and unhurried, the rain washing over them as if the world itself was blessing their love. In that moment, all fear and hesitation melted away, leaving only the undeniable truth: they belonged to each other. From heartbreak to unexpected love, Elise's journey had been anything but simple. But with Mara by her side, she realized that life's twists and turns, painful, messy, and unpredictable, could lead to the most extraordinary beginnings. And as they stood there, drenched and laughing in the rain, Elise knew that this was only the beginning of a love that would surprise, challenge, and ultimately complete her in ways she had never imagined. The weeks following that rain-soaked confession felt like waking from a long, suffocating sleep. Elise's apartment began to change subtly, boxes unpacked, photos of old travels placed carefully on shelves, little signs that she was no longer hiding from herself. Mara's presence, gentle but persistent, had become the pulse of her life. They moved with a natural rhythm, the kind that only develops when two people know each other's silences as well as their laughter. Elise would arrive at work, and Mara would be there, smiling like a sunrise she couldn't resist. They shared lunches, notes, coffee, and quiet glances that conveyed everything words could not. One Friday evening, Mara suggested they leave the city for a weekend. Elise hesitated, remembering the weight of past obligations, the old routines that had chained her. But Mara's hand in hers, warm and steady, was impossible to resist. "Just come with me," Mara urged, eyes sparkling. "No emails, no meetings, no past to haunt us. Just us." Elise laughed softly, the tension in her chest easing. "You make it sound like an adventure," she said. "Maybe it is," Mara replied. They drove north, out of the city, the skyline shrinking behind them until the endless green of forests and rolling hills took over. By late afternoon, they arrived at a small cabin by a lake, secluded and serene. The water mirrored the sky, calm and endless, like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Elise leaned against Mara as they unpacked, her head resting lightly on Mara's shoulder. "I can't believe how much I've been craving this," she murmured. "Craving what?" Mara asked, teasing. "Peace," Elise replied, "and you." Mara smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Elise's face. "Good answer." That night they sat by a fire, the cabin warm, the world outside forgotten. Mara handed Elise a glass of wine, and they talked for hours about past hurts, lost dreams, fears, and small hopes. For the first time in years, Elise felt completely safe, completely known. Mara's presence was not just comforting, It was transformative. Elise found herself sharing things she had buried for years, the quiet despair after realizing her marriage was over, the fear that she would never find someone who understood her, the unexpected longing she had for Mara that had grown silently over months. Mara listened without judgment, her eyes full of understanding and quiet admiration. "You are incredible," Mara whispered finally. "I've never met anyone like you, Elise." Elise felt a warmth bloom in her chest, one that wasn't just desire, it was gratitude, love, and the fragile thrill of finally being seen. She reached for Mara, intertwining her fingers with hers. "And you," she said softly, "have been my safe place all along." They kissed then, slowly, as if discovering each other for the first time. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't desperate. It was gentle, affirming, a promise without words. The fire crackled beside them, illuminating the softness of their faces, the vulnerability and strength mirrored in each other's eyes. The next morning, Elise woke to find Mara already awake, curled beside her. Sunlight streamed through the cabin window, casting a warm glow over them. Elise watched Mara sleep, the rise and fall of her chest, the peaceful expression on her face. In that quiet moment, Elise felt a profound sense of rightness. She leaned in and kissed Mara's forehead. Mara stirred, smiling sleepily. "Morning," she whispered. "Morning," Elise replied, voice low and tender. They spent the day exploring the lake, walking hand in hand through the forest, laughing at each other's clumsy attempts to skim stones across the water. Mara's laughter was like music, Elise's like wine through the trees, and together they created a symphony of joy that neither had experienced in years. Later, Mara pulled Elise close on the cabin porch, their legs dangling over the edge, feet brushing the soft grass below. "Elise," Mara said quietly, "I don't ever want this to end. This." Elise's heart raced, emotions swelling beyond the ability to contain them. She rested her head against Mara's shoulder. "It won't," she said, certainty blooming in her chest. "I promise. We'll make it through anything." Mara's hand tightened over hers, the warmth of her touch grounding Elise. "Good," she whispered, "because I don't know how I'd survive without you." Returning to the city felt different. The office, once mundane and sterile, now shimmered with possibility. Their relationship, though still delicate, was real, tangible, and growing stronger each day. Small gestures, Mara bringing coffee, Elise leaving notes on Mara's desk, shared lunches and quiet moments in the stairwell reminded them that love wasn't always loud, but it was persistent. One evening, Elise arrived at Mara's apartment after work, finding her cooking in the kitchen. The aroma of garlic and rosemary filled the space. Elise leaned against the doorframe, smiling. "You're amazing," she said. Mara glanced up, a playful grin on her face. "I know, but I cook better when I have an audience." Elise stepped closer, wrapping her arms around Mara from behind, resting her chin lightly on Mara's shoulder. "I'm always your audience," she whispered. Mara laughed softly, leaning back into Elise's embrace. "And I love that." They kissed, slow and intimate, savoring the closeness, the security, the knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged. Over the following months, their love deepened. Elise began to embrace a new independence, not the lonely independence she had known before, but one intertwined with love, trust, and companionship. Mara became her anchor and her wings, the person who saw her fully and celebrated it. They traveled together, discovered hidden corners of Portland, shared quiet evenings at home, and celebrated small victories and joys. Elise found herself laughing more freely, dreaming more boldly, and loving more openly than she had in years. One particularly quiet evening, as they sat on Mara's balcony watching the city lights flicker, Mara turned to Elise, eyes glistening with emotion. "I know we've been through so much," she said softly, "but I want to ask you something." Elise's heart skipped. "What is it?" Mara took both of Elise's hands in hers. "Will you be my partner? Not just now, but for everything that comes next." Tears brimmed in Elise's eyes, a mix of joy, relief, and certainty. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They embraced then, the cityscape stretching out below, but all that mattered was the warmth between them, the certainty that they had found each other in a world that often felt unkind and unpredictable. The following year, Elise and Mara continued building a life together. It wasn't perfect, life never was, but it was theirs. They supported each other through challenges, celebrated triumphs, and loved fiercely and openly. Elise often thought back to the day she signed her divorce papers, realizing that the end of one chapter had opened the door to a love she never expected but now could never imagine living without. They moved into a shared apartment filled with sunlight, books, art, and laughter. Friends and colleagues who knew them saw the transformation, the radiance, the ease, the undeniable bond that now defined their lives. One quiet evening as they prepared dinner together, Mara looked at Elise with a soft, teasing smile. "Remember when you told me you couldn't imagine looking at a woman that way?" Elise laughed, brushing her fingers through Mara's hair. "Yeah, seems ridiculous now, doesn't it?" "It does," Mara agreed, leaning in for a kiss. "Because now I can't imagine my life without you." Elise smiled, her heart full, her spirit unburdened. "Nor can I." And in that small sunlit kitchen, filled with warmth and love, Elise realized that happiness wasn't about avoiding heartbreak or following a perfect planet, was about finding someone who made the chaos of life feel like home. Mara's hand found hers across the counter, fingers intertwined, and for the first time in her life, Elise didn't feel alone. She felt seen, loved, and unshakably whole. They laughed, they kissed, and they dreamed together, the world outside fading away. And in that love, unexpected, tender, enduring, they discovered a joy more profound than either had imagined possible. No longer defined by past pain or missed opportunities, Elise and Mara moved forward, hand in hand, heart to heart, into a life that was messy, beautiful, and entirely theirs. Love, they learned, wasn't a destination. It was the quiet courage to keep reaching for each other, day after day, in a world full of uncertainties. And as Elise held Mara close that night, watching the city lights twinkle like distant stars, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. They had found home in each other. And that, finally, was everything. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.